Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this planet. We're here again for another WOWSA Live, and we have two very special guests. Ned, take it over.
My name is Ned Denison. I'm an epic marathon swimmer with more than 50 big swims around the world. I'm also the chairman of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, of which our next guest is an inductee. And a few years ago, I was a temporary chair of an International Ice Swimming Hall of Fame. And Jaimie was inducted into that as well. So, Jaimie, I'm going to turn it over to you. Your introduction should be at least 4 times as long as mine, so don't be shy.
Hey everyone, this is Jaimie Monahan from New York City, from my very small apartment in Manhattan. Like Ned said, I'm an inductee of the Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame as well as the Ice Swimming Hall of Fame. And I have done solo swims all around the world on every continent, and up to 33 hours in duration and up to 92 kilometers in length.
Okay, I was expecting a longer introduction, but that's fine.
Uh, we've got an echo. I don't know
Is
why.
that me?
No, go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Jaimie, go back over the sort of you swam on every continent of the Sea of Tranquility stuff, and give us a little more detail of flying around the world. Um, you know, how many days a year have you been doing this? How many air miles have you racked up? Just give us some idea because people don't understand the extent of your global swimming.
Sure. Well, I definitely have a passion not just for swimming, but also for travel and for designing expeditions. So it's definitely a passion of mine. I've done several personal challenges, including the Ice Sevens, which includes doing an ice mile. So 1 mile under 5 degrees on all 7 continents. In addition to that, I also did a personal project of 6 marathon swims on 6 different continents, but in just 16 days. So hard to estimate. I do travel a lot for both work and personal and swimming, but I'd say on a given year, I usually spend at least 10 to 50,000 air miles a year, and also more importantly, try to offset those with carbon credits as well. So very important to do to minimize your carbon footprint.
Okay, so give us an example of his 6 continents in 16 days. Did you pack kind of 3 swimsuits because you figured one would dry by the time you used the other two? Did you get out of the water at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, get in a taxi, go to an airport, catch a 7 o'clock flight to Tasmania? How did it all work?
Yeah, so and definitely I think with marathon swimming we always have the plan A, but you also need to have the plans B, C, and D sometimes. So our intent was to start off in Manhattan with the Rose Pittoff swim to kick that off. Unfortunately, there were crazy thunderstorms that day, so the organizers made the very smart decision to cancel that race. So I decided I had been scheduled on a flight to Colombia, to Cartagena the next day. So I continued on with that and being the first swim of the challenge, and then decided to organize something a little bit later back in New York or in North America once I returned from the other 5 continents. So yeah, started off with a beautiful swim in Cartagena, in their Rosario Islands. It's a beautiful national park area. Really hot water, about 30 degrees Celsius, and very sunny and warm. So that one actually went pretty well. The next day, we actually flew via Los Angeles to Australia, and did a swim in the sea there. So kind of went from the height of really warm water. It was actually winter in Colombia technically, but headed to Australia's winter, which was a lot colder, but not as cold. The water there was about 12 to 15 degrees Celsius. Stunning coastal swim. We did that accompanied by Vlad from Vlad Swim, who was really great. And one of my friends who's Australian actually hiked the coastal trail as we swam the 10K swim along there. So the first two went relatively well, until we decided to head to Egypt. And Egypt, the goal was to go to one of their really popular scuba areas to do a swim there. We had some issues with the boat breaking down, coral reef situation, so we had to pivot very quickly um, to do a swim in the sea by Alexandria, which involved kind of getting on a puddle jumper plane, heading to Cairo, and then taking a car about 3 hours in the middle of the night to Alexandria. This was kind of my backup swim, and I was really excited about it. We were swimming over these really historic ruins, and just really beautiful all along the coastline. More snags. The president of Egypt was actually staying at a waterfront hotel along the coastline, which we learned just about as we were taking off. So no motorized support vehicles were allowed on the coastline. So we did the swim accompanied by a rescue diver in full wetsuit and flippers and a jet ski, two different jet skis that kind of each took us halfway. So, definitely was a little crazy to kind of pivot and not even have the boat that we had organized, but we made the swim work. Again, I think it would have been one of the most stunning and beautiful swims, but unfortunately got a little bit attacked by jellyfish, and I was so jealous of the rescue diver wearing the wetsuit because his skin was protected and I was getting stung like something awful. So
You were kind of like
um,
an Ursula
af-
Andress in a James Bond movie. You couldn't officially be on the island, so you snuck over in your bikini.
well, the rescue diver, he was the Ursula Andress, but
Okay.
it was definitely a good story. It's either a good time or a good story, and this was definitely a good story. A little less uneventful. We also did a swim along the coast of Singapore, which was really, really beautiful. Had a great team there. We were very lucky in terms of the boat we had reserved was great and got us there. But once I had finished the swim, almost immediately I was getting back on and the boat conked out, and we actually had to be picked up by another boat from the organization. So I was very thankful that didn't happen during this swim. But again, it was kind of one of those plan B situations. The second to last swim was in Geneva, kind of familiar waters, having done the length of the lake a couple of times. This was on the old World Cup route across the width of the lake from Lausanne to Evian. I had actually volunteered for the event a couple of years with the team there, but this was my first time to actually get to swim that route. And that was kind of like perfect organization, a really nice great group of swimmers to swim with. The water was just about 20 degrees Celsius, perfectly clear, cool, beautiful day. And that was kind of like the one that went absolutely perfect to make up for all the ones that were a little bit more challenging. At the same time, as we were kind of flying around the world, I was still looking for that last backup swim to complete North America. So we had been working with the Coast Guard and the New York Police Department, and I wanted to do a swim that was really meaningful to me for the last swim of the challenge. So about a day before we were heading back to New York City, we got approval for the swim around Manhattan, and I was able to finish off the challenge with a loop around Manhattan Island, my home, a swim that I've done before and always love, and that was kind of the perfect capstone. Again, after kind of all the challenging situations, it was a really beautiful and meaningful one.
And so for the people listening who aren't necessarily familiar, the Manhattan swim is 28 and a half miles. If you're lucky, it's heavily tide assisted. If you're unlucky, you don't make it. And as you say, it's a swim you had done a few times before, so you're at least familiar with the cadence of the tides and the where the buildings are, what the bridges look like. So when you're a marathon swimmer, the more familiar you are with the course, often the easier it is mentally. And then you also have this dual life you live, which is at a certain point in the year you stop doing the big long swims and you start doing the cold swims. How do you make that transition? Is it the 1st of October you get a different set of the swimming equipment out, or is it the first day you go down to Coney Island and it's appreciably colder. How does it work for you, Jaimie?
It is funny. I do try to get into open water at least once a week. So as long as I'm getting in regularly, the temperature change is never too drastic from the week before. The exception kind of is when you get on a plane and you go to another part of the world where either it's winter or it's a lot colder if it's more north or south. But yeah, it actually is funny. I think I always, there's been a few swims where it's been longer and colder. And I think kind of just doing the hybrid packing, I kind of have my kit really down for the long marathon swims in terms of sunscreen, one type of swimsuit. And then kind of for the ice swimming, it's all about the gear. So, I think my snow boots usually take up most of my kit for that. So the kind of transitional packing is always the most challenged. Like, oh, are these the kind of goggles that I use for ice swimming or for marathon swimming? Do I need sunscreen? So yeah, it's definitely a mental shift, but probably more, it's always just the water, but the packing and the gear is a little bit different.
For some men, I'd be one of them. I can go to a long summer swim with easy carry-on luggage. If I'm going off someplace cold, I have to check a bag because, as you say, the boots are just so big and the jackets are so big, you're not getting them on a plane. Are you having a similar experience? Are you checking a bag everywhere you go?
I actually try not to check a bag if at all possible. I think for me with the summer swims, the exception is the sunscreen. I use diaper cream for zinc coverage. So if I am able to buy that where I am, I don't need to check the bag. But if I do have to carry that, the liquids. But it actually is really funny. I think with marathon swims, we always joke around that we're traveling with these mass quantities of white powder, but that's never really what gets flagged by TSA. They always look at the zinc because they say it glows under the x-rays. And then if you're traveling with any kind of thermoses, it kind of looks like bomb making equipment. So those, I usually try to take that out as it goes through because they're always very aware of that. But one of my gears for ice swimming is actually a vest that is heated and has some heating coils and a battery in it. And that I also know to take out because it basically looks like a explosive vest to the x-rays.
For the listeners who might not be understanding the powder comment, this is the carbohydrate powder we use for feeding. And if you do what I do, you end up putting it in a plastic bag, and then you put it in another plastic bag, and when you're done, it looks like 3 keys of cocaine. And I'm always worried that it's going to get seized along the way. But the only time I didn't worry was about 2 months ago when I was flying from San Francisco down into Mexico, and I thought nobody flies powder that direction, so I'd be absolutely fine. They won't be looking for it. What I didn't use in Mexico, I got rid of because I didn't really want to deal with flying back to the U.S. with it. Okay, you mentioned the Rose Pinnoff swim. I know it's a person that you kind of relate to. You're in New York, the hotbed of certainly early open water swimming. Superstars like Gertrude Ederle, and then the famous visitor Annette Kellerman. I know you were recently profiled in a book along with these other 3 superstars. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us what the purpose and the theme of the book was, and how you relate to these early pioneers.
Absolutely. So, for me, the history of marathon swimming is really important and meaningful. So, especially just the strong trajectory of female swimmers and kind of making the sport and just doing great things. So, I was really lucky to be invited to participate in an amazing project by this wonderful journalist called Haley Shapley. She's based out of Seattle, and was doing a book about the history of female strength and all types of record breakers, rule breakers, and historical figures in women's athletics. One of the biggest sections is about the history of marathon swimming, and how basically swimming went from something that it was kind of just not done for women to be swimming. It's like, oh gosh, we might see their ankles. And women were, swimming and drowning in these huge, voluminous swim costumes. We actually had about 150 years ago now, a big disaster here in New York City, where there was a steamboat called the General Slocum. And it was just a bunch of local people, mostly women and children, out on a pleasure cruise. They were invited by the local governments just to have a day of fun cruising around Manhattan. Unfortunately, the boat caught on fire, and just safety protocols were not there. And basically, over 1,000 people drowned, pretty much less than 100 meters from shore. So after that, a number of swimming foundations were set up to teach women how to swim. So pioneers like Annette Kellerman did a lot to get us away from these huge swimming costumes. And that was kind of the environment. Obviously a horrible disaster was the largest loss of life in New York City until September 11th. But the good thing was that we did learn from this, and women and children were taught to swim after that. And kind of in the rise of those swimming associations came great champions like Rose Pitnoff and Gertrude Ederle. And there was a lot of interest in marathon swimming as well for women. So the book itself is kind of just profiles of these historical figures, also intermixed with portraits and interviews with contemporary female athletes, myself being one. And the portraits are by this amazing director and photographer named Sophie Holland. And she's known for doing some of the photography for ESPN's The Body issue. So her work is just amazing. So for me, being very inspired by those women, was really meaningful for me to be profiled in this book along with them.
And these three famous lady swimmers pioneered a number of new swims. Also, something you've been talented and fortunate enough to do yourself. Talk to us about, and let's start with the marathon swim first, and we'll move to ice in a minute. Tell us about your most difficult physical swim, your most difficult mental swim.
That's a good one. And, I think it's a question that sometimes it even shifts day to day. I would say sometimes the harder ones are not even the longer swims, or the rockier swims. It's more about the mental mindset. So I think by the end of any super long swim, you're just hurting, and just need to kind of keep moving forward. I think mentally, probably one of my harder swims on the marathon swim side is probably one of the shortest ones. The Strait of Gibraltar was one of my earlier marathon swims, and just a beautiful swim, but kind of humming along for a few hours, not too long, great team. But towards the end, and I've heard this from a lot of people, there was just a really strong adverse current. So it was less than, I think, 50 meters from kind of touching the rocks and ending the swim. And it just really felt like almost an endless pool was coming at me. So I kind of put my head down. I was sprinting. I was not moving at all, but I knew I needed to make it in, or I would get pushed around the point and not be able to finish the swim at all. But kind of got in a slightly different angle, went as hard as I could, and was able to make it in. But for that duration, probably about 40 minutes trying to cover this very small stretch of water, I kind of was like sobbing in the water. I was moving my arms as fast as I could, and it really felt very hopeless at the time. And that's not usually how I feel during my swims. So that was one that I always remember. And, I try to think about that when I go through rough spots in any swim.
So for the listeners who might have experience with other sports, and I would hear, a marathon runner say, "Oh, towards the very end, we had to go up this hill, and after 25 miles, the last thing you wanted was to go up the hill." So in open water swimming, marathon swimming, yes, a little bit of current can be going up a hill, a little bit of wind, but in this case, the hill's actually moving backwards when that adverse current hits you. And then the other thing about Gibraltar is, due to the geography, is if you miss a good place to land in geography, the land then falls away. It then becomes increasingly longer. So being an extra hour late in Gibraltar can add 5 miles to your swim, because the coastline falls away from you as the current's pushing you. So it's interesting that of all the swims you've done, most people would put Gibraltar on the easier scale of that. And how about physically, the most difficult swim?
would say probably some of the longer ones. I think my first time doing Lake Geneva, which is it's a 70-kilometer swim. The first time I did it, it took me just under 33 hours to do. This is also a freshwater swim. I did do some freshwater swims for training for that event, but before that I had done mostly saltwater swims. And just to kind of describe the difference, I would say saltwater, you're more buoyant. It's a little bit easier on the swimming is a little bit easier, but it's kind of harder on your skin in terms of sunscreen is wearing off, you're getting chafed more. Freshwater, it's a little bit harder. You have to swim harder to keep yourself afloat, to kind of keep a good body position in the water. So I was very ill for most of that swim the first time. I remember feeling really stiff and sore, like I could kind of barely bend my, wrists and elbows. So physically that definitely took a toll. Just being in the water that long is pretty difficult. I was able to do it the other way the following year, and I think at that point I was a little bit better mentally trained. I wasn't ill that time, so that was a whole different experience. It was the same swim, but felt a lot easier just because I was more accustomed to it.
For listeners who might not be familiar with those kinds of differences, so in fresh water, Jaimie's quite a tall lady, so her legs would drop a tiny bit in fresh water, which would mean her shoulders are going to have to pull more. And I'm presuming at a certain point, well before you got to 33 hours, they started to burn just a little bit. And then I think the second difference that a lot of people will find in fresh water is the body position's just a little bit different. So the lower back, where it's all kind of coming together, is slightly out of your normal training whack. So your lower back is going to be sore earlier and longer and more sore than it would be for a saltwater swim that you're used to. So those are considerable problems when you start talking about 33 hours in the water. Let's move to the ice. Pick a continent, pick a temperature, pick a place, pick a language, pick a culture. Most difficult physical ice swim for you?
That's always, and this one I probably thought even a little bit more about than the marathon swim. I've been kind of lucky. The temperature is always under 5 degrees. Sometimes the air temperature is a lot colder. I have done ice miles in negative 30 Celsius. So that has a different impact. I would actually say probably one of the hardest swims physically for ice swimming was actually in New Zealand. I was swimming in a glacier lake in Iraqi Mount Cook National Park there. The water was probably about 2 or 3 degrees, but the air temperature was a lot warmer. It was probably close to about 20 degrees Celsius. So that was a little bit confusing. It was also a really sunny day, kind of one of those days where, it felt weird to be putting on sunscreen for an ice swim. So that was I think it kind of just confused my body. So it was very difficult mentally because you kind of feel this very warm air on your back and it makes the water feel even colder. So
Was there a quarter inch of sort of warm water on top of the cold as well from the sun? Nothing, no, didn't have that transition. And how about
no, just
how about mentally the toughest ice swim?
um probably the same. I would say one that was very challenging for me personally was I did do a mile in the negative 30 air temperature in Siberia in December. It was in a pool cut out of a frozen lake. And the water was actually steaming because compared to the air temperature, the water was so much warmer. So there's just billows of steam coming off the water. And, just as you go on, I was in the water about 30 minutes to do the mile, kind of at each flip turn, I'm really waiting to touch that wall. I'm touching below the ice because I don't want my hand to be cut by the ice. So just kind of ticking down those laps. It's pretty, even of my ice miles, most of them I've not done in a pool. So kind of just having each lap be a periodic countdown was mentally really challenging.
So to set the scene for everybody, this is a frozen a large piece of ice that somebody is coming along and they're cutting a pool out of 25 meters by 20 meters in length. They're pulling the ice out of it and continually straining the water with a big net as so to prevent the ice from freezing. How many people are out there enjoying the same event at the same time you are?
So for this one, it was actually a very unique event. It's kind of like a last man standing challenge. So you start out and you can basically do. I had in my head I wanted to do a mile. I thought this was a great place to push myself. So I did have in my head from the beginning that I would be doing a mile, but different people kind of you can go as long as you like, as long as it's safe to continue. So that was another thing that was probably pretty difficult. It was just a 2-lane pool, and I did start with another swimmer who was, very experienced Russian ice swimmer who was, it was great to have him in the lane next to me. But as it kind of got further and further into that mile, I was on my own. The good thing is there was a ton of safety crew, lots of spectators there. I could hear them cheering me on. Every time I went back and forth, I'd make a signal that I was okay, and kind of there was interaction with them. So that was really important.
And
But
tell
yeah,
the
some of these ice swimming events, we have, 10-lane pools, and it's really basically the same as a big swimming pool, but this one is kind of just a local competition with 2 lanes.
Okay, and tell us about this feared after drop in ice swimming. How do you approach that mentally and physically, and what are the different techniques that you've tried or had tried on you around the world?
Yep, yeah, and I think what I always like to do as much as possible is take advantage of the local knowledge. So for my first ice mile was actually in Iceland, and there in their local bathing group, they have a steam room that the local swimmers use to warm up. So after my ice mile, they actually covered me with this Icelandic wool blanket, walked into the warm steam room, and then gradually as I was rewarming. I didn't want to rewarm too quickly. The wool blanket actually kept the heat out. And then as I got warmer, I kind of opened up the blanket to have that increase my body temperature gradually. I've done everything. I would say the gold standard is in Russia, where they have these sauna ladies who are so kind, and they kind of put your hands and feet in cold water. They put hot towels on you to kind of warm you from the surface. You're also breathing in warm air, which rewarms you from the inside. The thing with the cold water is so that your hands and feet, that the warm blood doesn't rush back into your extremities too quickly and affect your blood pressure. And basically, the metric with that is once that, when you first put your hands into it, the very cold water feels actually warm compared to the water you've been swimming in. So once the water does feel cold, you can go into the sauna. You've rewarmed enough that you can kind of go into that warmer air. But I've done everything. For me, I love to breathe in warm air while I'm rewarming. So everything from kind of a heated car is great for me. On one of my swims, of course, we had a backup plan in case it wasn't possible. I just kind of got dressed and walked out, and just kept walking on a warmer day. So I've kind of done all the different methods. For me, I think you hear a lot of stories about the after drop, and, people having these really extreme feelings like fighting death and black rain and all these things. I don't really have that. If I felt like that during my swim, I would absolutely not do it. For me, especially when I have doctors, they usually are very surprised, because I'll just kind of be laughing and shivering, and your body rewarms itself as long as you're wearing comfortable clothing. So I've had things where they're measuring your blood pressure after an ice swim, and you don't really have blood pressure in your arms until you're pretty rewarmed. Or most temperatures for people are only go down to a certain amount, so you won't even have a temperature at all, but the doctors look at you, they're like, you're laughing, it's okay. So um, it's always funny for them that it's like, wow, you have no vital signs, but you're obviously all right. So
And before COVID hit our world, what were your goals for this summer, and what adjustments are you making? Have you made?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm about 12 miles from our, closest place that we're all able to swim. So I really haven't been swimming or doing much. I've been kind of hiking and jogging. I do like to do that along the river so that I can at least see water, even if I can't be in it. In terms of goals for the summer, I was looking to do a number of local swims. So, depending on how the summer turns out, that may still be possible. I'm not sure. But, again, like we love to swim, but this is so much more important. I think in the grand scheme of things, like personal plans, I'm happy to go. Of course, it's disappointing, but I'm happy to go with it because, we don't know what's happening here. So.
And how about your winter plans? Have you already planned another winter of various cold adventures?
No, not yet. I mean, everything's just on hold. We don't know even by this time next year if the world will be back to the normal state. It's definitely made me more conscious of my own traveling. And when I do resume, I definitely want to kind of be very thoughtful about the plans that I do make. So again, like I don't know that there's an end date in sight. I think everything's kind of tabled for now. For me, I've been enjoying doing a lot more reading, so focusing on the mental side. And again, we're in New York City. We have to get through this. So swimming in the grand scheme of things is not very important.
The most depressing thing we heard anybody say over the last couple of weeks was one of our swim colleagues in New Jersey. And he said, well, he said, even when the world is returned back to normal and even when the planes are flying around all over the place, he goes, my fear is they won't actually want somebody from New Jersey to come and visit them for a while. It just kind of hit me, and I went, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. We've come to pretty much the end of the time, Jaimie. Any last words? And maybe I'll prompt you a little bit. You're now in a book with these three famous women who are role models. One of the reasons they put you in the book is, like it or not, you're a role model. What kind of advice would you give to particularly young women who are trying to balance career, excitement, adventure, life?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for anyone, and when I was little, I had a sign on my wall that my dad made for me, and it said, "Girls can do anything." I feel like I've kind of lived that motto. I would say for, folks that have kids of either gender, I would say, dream as big as you can, and then, do the hard work to put the steps that you need to take to make the dream a reality. And, that's always been my priority, whether it's cold swimming or marathon swimming or even in my corporate career. So I think your life is as big as you can make it. So don't let people kind of cut you down and, do all the hard work and, go after your own vision.
Well, thank you very much. And we wish you all the best in the last few days and weeks of the lockdown and as things get more and more normal in New York. Thanks, Jaimie.
Great. Thank you, Ned. Take
Thank
care.
you.